And I'll start recording. Good morning again, and welcome to the Center of Excellence in Migration and Global Studies. We are delighted to have you joining us again to listen and contribute to this academic endeavor. It's important that we observe all the protocols. Like I said, I would like us to complete within the 1 hour slot because we are reaching you from Uyo Study Center, Uyo National Open University of Nigeria Study Center, where there's an official assignment going on. The Vice Chancellor, Professor Femi Peters, sent his greetings. He will join us later as soon as he's through with the visitors from, I believe, Israeli embassy that are visiting in this hour. He sent his words and appreciate all of us. So having said that, let me introduce to you the topic for today, which I believe we all, and the presenters also, is an outcome of a sponsored research by UNESCO. And Dr. Senayon Olaoluwa is the director of the Institute of African Studies at the University of Ibadan. He is also a graduate of WIT, we call it WIT, that is Witwatersrand in South Africa, one of the leading universities in the humanities and sciences, with a PhD in humanities, focusing on African poetry and diaspora. He has published widely, and is also editor or on the editorial board of many scholarly journals where you do not pay to publish. I think it was Professor Akpa that revoked that in his welcome address at this workshop currently going on in New York. So Professor Senayon, along with his mentees and colleagues, as highlighted, will be speaking to us about irregular migration from Nigeria. Irregular migration. So this is an empirical, the outcome of an empirical research funded by the UNESCO, and I think it will enrich us. Prof, are you with us? Because I know you were in and then you were out again. What I intend to do is to unmute everyone because Dr. Senayon may be signing in. I don't know which producer, Adebayo, Kabiru, Abdurrahman. So I'll unmute everyone. So please kindly mute yourself if you know you are not speaking. I've asked everyone to unmute so that we can get Professor Senayon to speak to us. The presenters have 40 minutes to speak about this subject. While we're waiting on them or the lead speaker, the irregular migration, when it comes to one's mind, you begin to think about even some of the articles and some of the interventions, eloquently and evidently presented on several occasions by both Professor Abdallah, the former Vice Chancellor, and Professor Sogolo, Emeritus Professor Sogolo, and some of us that have been regular participants. So we begin to ask the question again: why, how, when, where? What are the push factors, making this irregular migration? So Professor Senayon, you have with your team 40 minutes to present to us, and then we will open for questions and comments, and then we can wrap it up by 11 o'clock. Thank you very much. You have this the virtual spacer, Professor Senayon.
All right. Thank you very much. May I begin by sharing my screen? Please
Okay, you like to
enable.
share? Okay, let me give you co-host. You co-host, and you
Morning, how are
can
you?
share. Let me see, co-host, and then you are able to share. So now we'll stop sharing from my end. I'll stop sharing, so you can share, Doc.
Okay.
Kindly mute yourself if you are not speaking, please. Thank you. Go ahead, Prof.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank the Center for Excellence, Migration, National Open University for giving me this privilege to make this presentation. Special thanks to the director, Professor Tijani. This morning, the topic before us, which I am presenting on behalf of my team, is irregular migration from Nigeria, causes, risks, and policy implications. Other co-authors are Dr. Oluwatosin Adeniyi, Department of Economics, University of Ibadan, stroke Diaspora and Transnational Studies, the Institute of African Studies. Dr. Lutayo Tade is of the Department of Sociology, University of Ibadan, and is also affiliated to us at the Institute of African Studies on Diaspora and Transnational Studies. Research assistants on the project have been Henrietta Shalomi, Feishita Ijima Kinwa, and Richard Anya. We had we carried out this research some time ago, sponsored by UNESCO, to examine, what are the causes beyond what, are ordinarily acknowledged. And we came up with the following findings, while at the same time, considered their policy implications with recommendations. So I begin by looking at what we may want to know, of course, as irregular migration, especially from the perspective of our own study. Our definition here, admittedly, is limited, to transnationalism. And so we look it from that perspective of, well, if you like, external migration, migration across national borders. And so we regard irregular migration as, can everybody hear me? So we refer to irregular migration as describing those sophisticated, high-risk, daring, and evasive methods to enter another country clandestinely. And this is what makes it irregular, precisely because ordinarily there are laid down rules and regulations for transnational migration as people, plan and imagine that they can travel from one country to another. There are set rules. For instance, they need to apply for a visa to get a passport, apply for a visa, have a convincing reason for traveling, whether it's because one has got a job or one is going on a vacation and so forth, or on a medical trip and all that. Once these requirements are met, ordinarily, migration becomes very, very regular. Migration becomes hitch-free. But where people tend to detour or cut corners precisely because maybe they do not have the qualifications for regular migration. They then have to go through these high risk journeys. They are also sophisticated because there is a sense in which when you encounter the actualities of these forms of migration, you are shocked at, what you come face to face with. A few days ago, for instance, there was this video trending about a small car, a small Camry car that packed irregular migrants, and they were stopped at the border. From the back seat alone, about 12 adults came out of the back seat of a small car. 12. That is talking about, that's an illustration of the sophistication, an illustration of the high risk, an illustration of, the daredevil, the extreme danger, the extreme risk people take just to be part of this experience of irregular migration. Now, the desperation feels, the desperation that fuels irregular migration also leads to a situation in which migrants become inadvertently to the dark realities of international travel. We'll be talking more about all this later. But basically, irregular migration um, makes migrants particularly vulnerable. And so they are made, for instance, to negotiate not only their values, but in some cases, to even negotiate their humanity. Excuse me. And so they tend to be offered things that belittle them, things that compromise their humanity, and and those offering such are always quick to remind them of the illegality in which they are involved. So broadly considered, irregular travel includes all those who work in underground economies in Europe, domestic workers who are denied, and other places who are denied their rights by their employers. Those individuals, mostly ladies, traffic to work in the highly racialized sex industries of Europe, Dubai, and all other places, around the world. We will be talking basically and primarily, from our own context in Nigeria, to other places. And so, for instance, there have been in recent times cases of irregular migrants to the Middle Eastern countries who have been subjected to various forms of humiliation, dehumanization, because precisely those doing this to them are conscious of the fact of the irregularity of their travel. So those who also overstay their visas, also come under this category of irregular migrants. So when having established what it means to belong to this kind of category, or this kind of matrix of travel, we then begin to look at the causes of irregular migration, and of course, which may not all be new, but we also need, but we need to take a look at about 21 of such that we have identified in our findings. The first here is dystopian mentality. There is always this binary of utopia and dystopia. And generally, the challenge we have in Nigeria today is that an average young man, an average young woman has a feeling that here, the homeland, is not the best place to be. Everything is considered lousy. And so there is a general sense of dissatisfaction with the homeland. And that is the whole idea of dystopia. Once there is a sense of dystopia in that overwhelming sense, what then follows is that such people begin to think and imagine another place, another climate, mostly outside the country, that is considered to be the opposite of the homeland. That place then creates a sense of utopia, a sense of a location where everything is beautiful altogether. And when that happens, you discover that people become vulnerable to irregular migration. At other times, it's about social pressure. So many people want to leave the country just because people around them have come to the conclusion that that is the most fashionable thing to do. Because it does appear that you do not quite belong if you do not have a profile of having been out of the country. So people, and then the moment that happens, you discover that people who are overwhelmed by such consciousness would want to do anything to leave the homeland. And when they are that desperate, they become vulnerable to all the earlier circumstances of irregular migration that we identified at the beginning of this presentation. And then there is another factor that is related to that. And we call it special cognitive challenge. Because people are not even able to have a good sense, a good analytical sense of where they think they are going. They then run into various challenges. So there is something cognitive about traveling, about migration. Do you have an understanding of your homeland? Are you able to analytically examine what potentials, what prospects await you when in your imagined place of destination? Once one is not able to do this appropriately, you discover that oftentimes people run into the challenges of irregular migration. I'll illustrate with the case of someone who claimed that the Spirit of God told him he would travel out of this country without stress one day. And then he was running off his master's program at or MBA for that matter, and at a university. And somebody just called him one day, hey, come over to this embassy and pick your visa. I said, yes, God told me that. And just like that, he then picked his visa and then landed in that country. There was no plan. He had no cognitive, understanding. There was no cognitive agency about his destination. And so he got there and became stranded. Somebody running off his master's in Nigeria ended up a cobbler, a shoemaker in that country, and has ever since been struggling because he couldn't do a proper analysis of his homeland as against his destination. For others, it is about status embellishment. And when I talk about status embellishment here, it is both individual and collective. For some people, it is individual when they just want to be able to say, maybe on Facebook, that yes, I have just landed in the US, or I have just landed in Morocco, I have just landed in Sweden, I have just landed anywhere, including Malawi, for so many people. And so that is individual. It is also collective, meaning from personal to a collective level of status embellishment. There are parents, there are brothers, there are sisters, there are uncles who want to tell people that, excuse me, my nephew or my niece is in the US. Oh, I have a brother in America. I have a sister in Dubai. Oh, our last born is now in the US. They do not care how such relations get to those places. And you find some of them saying, look, just get out of this country, because subsequently, such relations want to be able to tell people that I have a relation out there. And in the process of mounting such pressure, we discover that so many people have become victims of irregular migration. Then constructed media realities. We all know the role the media have always played in narratives of migration. And so people travel down because of what they have watched in Nollywood. They want to travel down because of what they have seen people project about Dubai. A few years ago, there was a video trending about Nigerians who found themselves in Dubai just because of, the images of Dubai presented to them. Then they ended up in locations worse than Ajegunle. 50 of them living in a room without a toilet in Dubai. And that is exactly, what happens when people become carried away by, some of these media projections. There is also the challenge of what I call planetary binary. In the 21st century, we have ended up dividing the world into two broad categories. You are either in the global north or you are in the global south. The global north is considered to be beautiful altogether, that location of utopia, while the global south is not quite where to be. So that some people who are doing very well in a place like South Africa are not still satisfied because they consider themselves to be in the global south. And so they want to travel to Europe and America. And in the process of doing that, they end up becoming victims of irregular migration. Another cause is what we call infatuation with climatic conditions. Some people can't just wait to take pictures during the snow, the winter in Europe and America. They want to take pictures and show people on social media that, oh, I'm now in Europe. Oh, they're like, I mean, the best that can ever happen to them is to live in those temperate regions. And that desperation to live in the temperate regions, becomes one thing that pushes them into all manner of vulnerable situations. We cannot also deny the fact that functional institutions and infrastructures have had a way of informing, of precipitating irregular migration. When people sit back and read about how the system works in Europe and America, they then conclude that they can do anything just to put the homeland behind them. And so in a bid to participate or in a bid to be beneficiaries of these good institutions and infrastructure, they become vulnerable. Sexual orientation and safety becomes another issue. Nigeria, for instance, is a country where homosexuals are considered to be outlaws. The outlawry of their sexual orientation has had a way of pushing many people to consider having to leave this country through irregular means. Research I conducted some time ago, proved that, and so many people who are on the verge of suffering mental illness then consider that if we are not accepted in Nigeria, then we need to leave, and we can leave anyhow. And you find a category of such people, migrating through the irregular means. For some others, it's about religion. So the religion, the practice may not be well accepted in this part of the world, where for our fanatism, We can even disown our own children. We can disown our relations for not practicing certain religions as specified maybe by culture, family, and all that. When that happens, such people become vulnerable. It's also about the popular opinion, about these destinations. And it's like once you are in the US, you can never be poor. And when people have such, impression and fall for it, they then, become victims of irregular migration. There is also the dimension of family pressure. Some family members, in some cases, parents, make life miserable for their children and then mount pressure to that extent that they eventually end up, going the wrong route. For some others, as research has shown, especially in states like Delta and Edo, spousal pressure can make people become victims of irregular migration, where I once heard that in a family, both the husband and the wife came to the conclusion that they already had 4 kids, and those were enough for them. The wife was free to just go through the regular route to Italy and then make money for the family. That is one level of pressure. There is another level of pressure that obtains from domestic violence, so that there have been cases of women who literally walked away from their matrimonies precisely because of being victims of domestic violence from their husbands. And when that happens, they become vulnerable, and the only option that will come to some of them will be to go through the irregular route. And one woman did, from a unit of data I am analyzing. And when she did, she was away for several years. By the time she came back, she was a shadow of herself and she died. At other times, the Abrahamic faiths have also become one means put together by which people become very, very vulnerable. We've had cases of people who go to, Mecca, and then they meet Nigerians who have become beggars. And then they ask them, I mean, how come you are begging in Saudi Arabia? They say, well, I came for Hajj, many years ago, and then some things happened and blah, blah, blah. And so we are not able to return to Nigeria. And they become beggars. At other times, and this is from another unit of data, young people become particularly vulnerable, whereby some adults come around pretending to be particularly virtuous and pious and telling them about the necessity of paying, of observing the holy pilgrimage to Mecca, for instance. And they will offer to assist these young ladies to be young Alajas. They jump at it only for them to discover that they will over there be given out as sex workers, used and dumped. We've had so many cases of this in Oyo State, especially in the course of our research. And then you also have those people who just want to be JP. They just want to go to Jerusalem, even when they do not have the means. And in the process of it, they become very, 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 very vulnerable to irregular migration. Then there are others who become victims of irregular migration because of unfavorable cultural practices, like the mutilation of sexual organs for women, and how that and how that has had a way of pushing people. And then there is that case of undulating legality. People go in legally, and then they exceed their stay, and then they begin to run up and down, they begin to hide, and they begin to do all manner of impossible things. Between the border between Germany and Poland the other time, a Nigerian was, for instance, accosted in a train, and he was asked to identify himself. He mentioned his name and his country. He said Nigeria, and then where is your passport to prove that? He said he had no passport. Precisely because he probably got to Germany legally, overstayed, and now he wanted to move to Poland, and he was stopped. So you don't have a passport. How old are you? A grown man with beard. He said he was 16 years old. So the immigration officers were like, come on, you must be lying. How can you with your beard be only 16 years old? And the only response was that, were you there when my mama born me? Now, that, I mean, Nigeria for sure. But you can see what is going on there. He claimed to be 16 years old because that will make him a minor. And so he probably would not, the immigration officer will not be able to discipline him or, list him for repatriation because he was a minor, even when he was bearded, heavily bearded. But there was no evidence. So he asked them if they were there when his mother gave birth to her. Of course, they were not there. And so appearance is not a reality. He was trying to be smart. There is no doubt about that. But you can see how, the circumstances of instability can make people who were once regular migrants become irregular migrants. And so they overstay. And then for some others, they need to escape from unfavorable political climate. We experienced much of this during the days of Abacha, and people had to leave Nigeria anyhow. We can even still remember the case of our own Nobel laureate, Wole Soyinka. But then there are so many others who go through, who might not be as privileged as he was, and they will run into some of these crises because, of course, people are often seen as enemies of the state in some circumstances once they have contrary opinion. And then this one is another that we have also realized. We call it subverted or compromised royal stroke executive retinue. Some people hear, oh, there is this influential royal father, traditional ruler who will be traveling to the UK. Because of his status, he will have a very large retinue. We have discovered that so many people take advantage of that. They join the influential monarchs, and then when they get to Europe, they disappear without papers. At other times, they may want to even go with governors and all that, and over there, they disappear. They want to, at other times again, go with maybe our sports clubs, the national sporting teams, and when that happens, we recently had the case of those who eventually disappeared from the World Cup in Russia, only for them to be stranded. And so these continue to happen. And of course, there is also that high demand, unabated, high demand untrammeled for commercial sex workers in Europe and America and Asia. At the moment, especially Black sex workers. This has had a way of making more people vulnerable to irregular migration. Lastly, there is also the case of the point about what we call redemptive mentality. Some people want to play Jesus Christ in their family. So it's not for those people, it might not even be that they are in desperate conditions that warrant them leaving Nigeria, but they feel they are not able to do enough for their families when they are in Nigeria. So they want to leave for Europe, for America, for the United Arab Emirates and other places so that they can work some more to be able to fix their parents, fix their brothers, fix their sisters, fix their cousins and nieces. They want to be the good brother, they want to be the good sister, and in the process of it, they become very vulnerable. I mean, from data, the data I was sharing with a colleague in the UK a couple of months ago, she told me that, you know what, Shenayo, Black migrants are vulnerable in the UK also because most of them are not able to live in good homes. And because they live in very, very despicable conditions, there is that tendency for them to be more vulnerable than other migrants and the white folks. And I said, why? Is that because 80, if not 90% of the money they make, they are sending back home to Ghana, to Nigeria, to Congo, to everywhere, just to fix the people at home. And in the process of fixing the people at home, they are not able to do anything really good for themselves. And when
Sorry,
this happens,
you have 5 minutes.
so when this happens, we discover that these people become very, very vulnerable to all manner of risks, physical risks, you know, that we have read of what the risk people face in Libya, risks they face in crossing the Sahara Desert, the Nigerian desert, the Algerian desert, and then the risk they also face when they try to cross the Mediterranean, becomes another one from everywhere. Financial risk. Sometimes somebody is able to raise $6,000 and still thinks he's poor in Nigeria. And then some people take the $6,000 from him and then ask him to walk through the desert. Only for such people, if they ever succeed to arrive in Europe or America, to discover how vulnerable they are financially. At other times, they even lose their lives, or they are not able to make it. They return home empty-handed after selling their shops, offices, and their businesses. And then, the cost of travel to Europe, the cost of crossing the Mediterranean is another risk. And then the cost of living in Europe, and then the risk women face. So we're not talking about some risks that are gender-based. The risk that women face on their journey to Europe, making them sex slaves and all that. The slave scandal, we had them in 2018 in Libya. It's still very fresh. And when there are unaccompanied minors, these people also face such challenges. And again, not only is it that they face the risk of rape, some of them also are gang raped. And then we talk about social risks. They are discriminated against because, wherever they find themselves, they know that they are traveling irregularly. And so people take advantage of them. And then in moving through the Sahara Desert, for instance, a number of these countries are vulnerable to civil wars and all. And these irregular migrants get, caught in the crossfire. Political risk, the risk of conscription. So they go as migrants, they end up as slaves. The risk of rejection. And for men, they also face sodomization and all the other risks associated. And then people, discover that they are downgraded socially, so that you're working with your BSc in Nigeria, you end up becoming maybe a driver, or you even become a cleaner, because nobody will allow you use your passport. I was in Lebanon in 2018 for a presentation at the Nigerian embassy in celebration of the independence anniversary that year. And we met some Nigerians who complained they missed their passports. And so they couldn't go out to look for jobs. And they began to do all manner of irregular things. And then they also face the risk of the harvesting of their organs, as we can see in that illustration, and all this. When all this happens, and I'm running.
You have 2 minutes. Yes, please.
They have implications for policies, and so African countries lack a cohesive migration policies, and that has had a way of informing why people are increasingly vulnerable to irregular migration. And countries like Tunisia, Sudan, and all that people pass through, face all manner of challenges, and when all this happens, they are also unstable. And so even when there are laws put in place, implementation becomes a challenge. And then European countries, together with America, practice discriminatory migration laws, and that aid the transfer of skilled labor and specialized workers over the underprivileged. So if you are extremely skilled, and this is in another ongoing research at the moment, I am looking at what it means for the transition to such a transition, historical transition, from looking for able-bodied men to able-brained people, so that the slavery still continued, and where people are considered to be adequate, they can go through the regular means, and those who are not as adequate then face the challenge. And the migrant support system frameworks are also being underfunded. That's another challenge. And America continues to separate children, from their parents, and we know all that happened during the days of Trump. And some of these countries do little in controlling the continuous dependence by sectors of their economies on irregular migrants. Millions of people are expected to work in the plantations in America. And America says, oh, we are against irregular migration, but you also need these irregular migrants to work in your plantations for harvesting and other things. So we discover, this level of international inconsistency, as one of the things that, affect how we may control this. And I'm rounding up.
Prof, can you just round up? We can come back to some of this.
How then do we stop all this? All the identified institutions, national and international, have a role to play. And most importantly, as I conclude, the dystopian condition of the Nigerian homeland, of the West African homeland, of the African homeland, needs to be addressed by state governments, by governments of African states, so that when the homeland, gives a sense of assurance, we will be less vulnerable to irregular migration. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you all.
Thank you very much for yielding back to us. Really appreciate you, and I think you can see people clapping. We thank you for sharing this empirical research funded by UNESCO, and we're looking forward to a possibility of peer review and publications in our journal. The Center's International Journal of Migration and Global Studies, if you so wish. We do not charge to publish, thanks to the visionary who has also joined us, Professor Abdallah. So in this order, I will want you to kindly speak, ask your question, be brief, and then Professor Senayan will then respond to those comments or questions. But let me start with my own. Could you shed more light on the mental health, the mental health challenges when we talk about this irregular migration, looking at the mental health consequences? Also, can you shed more light on the methodology your team used in arriving at this informative write-up and your presentation? At this point, I would like to call on Dr. Basui Mekusi.
Thank you very much. Let me begin by commending Prof. Shinayo, members of his team for that wonderful presentation. And as a follow-up to the first two questions asked by the co-host, I think it would be very important for us to know the methodology adopted and possibly part of the analysis of the data gathered. Secondly, I'd like to also ask if it is not possible for the idea of dystopia mentality to be broken down further in a way that it will foreground the issue of economic reasons and realities. From the presentation of Proshenaya, it was as if the idea of misconception, meta misconception, which cannot be justified. But I believe beyond that, there is the reason to situate the idea of the economic reasons, which are realistically available in some of these countries, the host countries, where people are migrating from. Thirdly, I'm not very comfortable with the classification of Nigeria to one just clean slate, considering the fact that our experiences in relation to travels and migration are not the same. When we look at the idea of the binary of the North and the South, we travel for different reasons. And I want the researchers to look at the idea of the peculiarities of migrants from these two major blocks and their reasons in relation to the reasons for their migration. Fourthly, I believe the idea of the scavenging propensities of terrorists to some nations could also be cited as one of the reasons for irregular migration. If we come to look at the activities of terror groups like IS, Al-Qaeda, and etc., you discover that these people are pillaging developing nations, particularly on the continent of Africa. And they take people away, or they cause people to move from their old spaces to new ones. And along the line, there could be issues or complications around travels, which would turn people to irregular migrants. Lastly, there are people who also migrate regularly, but by reason of certain disruptions, maybe in their academics or marital disruptions, who will transmute from being a regular migrant to an irregular migrant. I don't know if this paper has the mind to look at it. Thank you very much once again for the paper.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I've asked Professor Abdallah Ubadamu, immediate past VC of NOUN, to kindly speak. And please, if you would like to speak, kindly just private chat me, then I can call you.
Thank you very much, Coordinator, for this. Mine is also related to methodology. I would have loved to see figures, statistics that indicate that there's an empirical process to this, or in the absence of specific numbers that can be allocated to the categories of irregular migration and the reasons for that irregular migration, and ethnographic data that shows a contact between the researchers and the migrant. Because most of the criteria that have been discussed seem to be fairly general in nature, and they are deductive based on what has been going on in the media about people who migrate. I would have loved to see something a bit more concrete that connected a particular variable with a particular cluster, so that we can say, yes, this is a credible threat to population disruption. And secondly, I would have loved if the issue of irregular migration is also looked at from a much wider perspective. It seems that most of the discussion and the debate and the narrative on irregular migration in the paper, or alluded to in the paper, seem to be focusing more on Europe and America rather than other areas. I would love to know what is the pattern and the trajectories of irregular migration to New Zealand, for instance, Australia, Vietnam, Japan, Iceland, Russia, and so on and so forth. Why have there been little data on all these far-flung areas? And migration also as a status symbol and social engineering is very critical. And yet government is asked to do something about it. But at the same time, there's a paradox. It is a social engineering thing, and it also represents Nigeria, but in a very, very bad light. I was in Dubai one day, and there was some armed robbery by some Nigerians. And the next thing you know, the police were going around collecting passports of every single black person. Whether you are Kenyan, Somali, or Nigerian, they don't care. Some Nigerians have done this, they are black people, so that every black person is a Nigerian. That's social engineering, social misperception. But at the same time, if government is asked to do something, as the presenter indicated in the final part of his paper, what do we do about the remittance that the migrant or whether regular do, which is also much needed in Nigeria? And finally, my final observation is there any pattern, although he alluded to it but did not discuss it, is there any pattern of migration that is regionally located? For instance, those from the northern part of the country, I'm talking about Kano, Zamfara, Yobe, Katsina, far north, where do they migrate to? It is very easy to say they migrate to Mecca. But that migration to Mecca, in most cases, is for religious purposes. Because once they finish the religion, and they go there to beg. I know a beggar in Kano, a woman beggar who has 2 million naira, 20 million naira in her account, 20 million naira in her account. And she sponsors a whole range of people to go to Mecca during during Mecca pilgrimage period to beg. And she gives them their percentage and they come back. But then she goes back again during the Umrah, because there is Mecca, there is Umrah, there's the Hajj, there's the Umrah. So this is one isolated case that much I know. I would like to know, where do Northerners migrate to? And what is the level of their remittance back home? I know where Southerners migrate to. Everybody from Delta seems to want to go to Italy for one reason or the other, or Germany or something like that. So I would love if the data is drilled down to indicating international preferences for migration. If they don't have that data, that could be something somebody could focus on. But finally, my real observation is that I would love to see a more ethnographic data rather than just statistical data. If there's statistical data, that helps. But an ethnographic data that shows an interface between the researcher and the subject will give us a much more better picture of this process of both, whether regular or irregular migration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. I would like to call on Professor Bewaji and also to thank him and others in the diaspora. It is actually about 4 a.m. or so, or 5 a.m. They constantly join us. We will look into that situation to see whether we can move this to a much more conducive hours. We thank you. But Professor Bewaji, if you have comment, you can. I will ask you to unmute. You'll be followed by Emeritus Professor Sogolo. You've been asked to also unmute. And after those two, I'll see if I would like to, if we have the time, to allow one or two others to speak. So in that order, please, Professor Bewaji.
Ogami, thank you very much. I wasn't going to say anything because I'm learning a lot. And as a nocturnal human being, it's not inconvenient for me to join anything I'm interested in any time of the day or night. The only observation that I will add to the comments already made by our amiable former Vice Chancellor and the other gentleman, Dr. Mikusi, is that migration has always been part of human life. The challenge that I would have loved to see is how much Nigeria or African countries
take measures to protect their citizens wherever they may be, whether they are regular migrants or irregular migrants. Let me use an experience in Jamaica when I was the president of the Association of Nigerians in Jamaica. Many people believe that there is a transit passage from Jamaica to the US, like a land bridge that they could just walk across. And in some instances, they just come, they land. Many of them are poorly trained. They have nothing to do. And usually it could be in the middle of the night, I'll get a call from the immigration or the police indicating that somebody has landed. And in many instances, we will have to go and take custody of them until they could be repatriated. And that was because we had very good, the embassy was very cooperative with us so that we would not become a problem to the society. But many of our colleagues who come like that, they don't want to go back. They think that what we are doing is actually wrong, sending them back. But if we don't send them back, they are going to end up in jail and their condition will be worse than what it was in Nigeria before they migrated. So, you know, I want the researcher to look at, Professor Olaoluwa, to look at, you know, how countries in Africa, especially Nigeria, take measures to track their citizens who may be anywhere, whether they are formal or informal migrants. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Emeritus Professor Sogolo. After him, we will have Dr. Akim Molayo and one other. So you can put your hand down. Emeritus Professor, please.
Yeah, thank you, moderator. First of all, I want to congratulate Dr. Sanayo Laulu for this well-researched presentation. It is well-researched to the extent that it contains a lot of information, so much about the causes of regular, by which it means, you know, illegal migration, the experiences and so forth. But the main point I really wanted to make is one that Professor Abdallah has taken up from me, and he always does this, as if he reads my mind. I want to make a point, and then he starts speaking, and he takes up everything, but I can still make some point. One of the points I find, which appears to be a weakness in this presentation, which the author must look into, is that there's so much of signposting, so much information. A lot of what he says are true, but then the question I ask myself is this: what ties them together? Because that's what we want to do as academics. You have facts, you've done your research, but then you must be able to draw some, you know, we call them law. Because you see, you have hypotheses, and so forth, facts. But try to create some string of some law, you know, that tie them together. And that is, to me, that appears to be missing. It needs to put them together so that you can now say, okay, this is the beginning, and this is the middle, and this is the conclusion. That way, it becomes a coherent paper. But we still, well, it's research in progress. So I expect that Dr. Laulu will be able to do this at the end so that it will give us a coherent paper presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Professor Abdallah, thank you.
Dr. Akim Olayan, you have 30 seconds, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sinayan, for this presentation. Yeah, thank you very much, sir. Dr. Sinayan, I really like to thank you for the presentation. Actually, I would like to ask this question. We have a lot of survivalist cosmopolitans that are moving outside Africa, Nigerians moving outside, and they are facing a lot of difficulties. In fact, there are some people that are not even encouraged to move out. What can be the solution? What can the African governments the African presidents or the foreign ministers, what can they do to solve the solutions of all these migrants? What can make an easy access for them to move out? What can encourage them? Dr. Sinayam, please, I would like you to talk more on that. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much. Dr. Kundayo, you'll be the last, and then we can have Dr. Senayo to respond. Dr. Kundayo, you've been asked to unmute yourself. Ekundayo Samuel. Unmute yourself, sir. I guess he's not asking the question or comment anymore. Dr. Senayo, kindly respond. We are
right.
almost out of time. Respond, please. Go ahead.
Yes, I would like to thank everyone for their questions, which tend to enhance this work that is still in progress. Let me begin by saying that this project for UNESCO is the first stage of it. And so we cannot claim to have done an ethnography of irregular migration. What we have done is a first stage preliminary pilot study for UNESCO. So, and when we submitted our report, part of the recommendation was that it will be required of us to move on to the next stage, which will be the real ethnography of irregular migration as it concerns contemporary experiences in Nigeria. And with that clarification, I am sure I would have addressed a number of issues having to do with signposting and other things. Having said that, I will be able to address a couple other questions. For instance, the issue about mental health and the challenges people face. I was talking earlier on about a research I did personally some time ago on LGBTQ and I Nigerians, and how the outlawry of their sexual orientation has driven some of them, to the edge of mental illness. For some of them to escape and, well, regain or rescue their sanity, they have had to take some desperate steps to be able to leave the country. And so that makes them vulnerable to irregular migration. So that is one thing about it. And then, yes, absolutely, Dr. Mekusi, terrorism has also had a way of precipitating irregular migration. Recently, in a separate research I am doing at the moment on the farmer herders crisis, I've discovered that some women in the farming communities are not only raped by the herders, they also end up being abducted and sold into slavery, literally. And then they will have to be moved across the Sahara, to Saudi Arabia and other countries. So to that extent, terrorism has also had a way of increasing the spate of irregular migration as we see it in Nigeria. So to Professor Abdallah, it is still an ongoing research. And so this is just a presentation of preliminary findings that will set the tone as we go back to meet with UNESCO for further research And our recommendation is that we should really do an ethnography of this. Then talking about the regional patterns of irregular migration. That is true that the patterns are not all the same. And in the North, the dynamics are different. And because they are different, one way of illustrating the difference is that when Nigerians were caught in their thousands to be victims of the slavery scandal in Libya in 2018, an IOM report shows clearly that most of the irregular migrants were from the south of Nigeria, not from the north. And the irony is that most of these migrants, irregular migrants from the south, went through the north. But in the end, not many northerners were caught in that because the dynamics are different. And to that extent, it is expected as we move on to the next stage of this research to look at the various dynamics that inform why, for instance, there is that predisposition towards the Middle East. But beyond that, we need to begin to look at the dynamics beyond what we ordinarily knew in the past. And as we discussed that, we're also going to look at the interface of some of these patterns, in a way that merge the North and the South. For instance, in Oyo State now, there is this tendency for most young ladies to migrate to the Middle East. That is precisely because of the huge number of the Muslim populations. So most people in Ibadan want to, as a matter of fact, are easily fall victim of becoming trafficked to Saudi Arabia, to places like Lebanon and all that, yet they are not from the North. And we need to understand why these things are so. Then Professor Bewaji's question on what the government is doing to track, what measures the government takes to track the location of its citizens abroad. Well, I have been working to some extent with the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, and part of what is at stake here is to collaborate with organizations like IOM and to some extent UNESCO to be able to track. But we have also reported that whatever we are doing at the moment is not enough. At other times, I think what the government also does is to rely on preliminary findings. For instance, when I was in Lebanon in 2018 to deliver the independence lecture, I returned my findings, which I submitted to the commission. And so when suddenly we began to have crises about irregular migrants and what they were facing in Dubai, it was easy for the government at that stage to fall back on my report to act towards rescuing a number of people from Lebanon during that time. Yes, sir. Professor Emeritus Sogolo, absolutely. A lot of signposting at the moment, but we hope to do the needful in terms of the empirical research. Mr. Akim Molayo, survivalist cosmopolitans, what the government can do to make their exit very easy. That goes back to my conclusion that the government has to create a more conducive atmosphere for both those who have chosen to remain in the homeland as well as those who want to leave the country. So it brings us back to the question of institutions. We need to build very, very viral, or maybe rebuild very, very viral institutions, formidable, that can stand what obtains in other parts of the world And that way, we can stem the tide of irregular migration and make Nigerians, especially young ones, travel with dignity and honor. I would like to thank you all.
Thank you very much. And I want you to do your camera so that we can see your face. We are recording. That's good. So when next I see you in Lebanon, I can assist you and get you a ticket back home. Well, we will yield the floor to the visionary and the founder of the center, Professor Abdallah, to say one or two things again. Before he did that intervention, let me again convey the goodwill message of the current Vice Chancellor, Professor Femi Peters. He joined us, but unfortunately, you know, being a new person on the new post, you have so many people coming in to see him. I think this hour is meeting with the Israeli people from the embassy and one other people. So he just have to be excused. On this note, I thank each and every one of you for being here. Our statistics today shows high of 45 and up, and sorry, low of 47, and then high in the very high 50s, which is quite encouraging. And I also thank the VC and the Professor Akbar for allowing those that are supposed to be working on this workshop at this moment to also join us. You know, some of them joined and they were using one, you know, system or what have you. So I just have to really appreciate them. So Professor Abdallah, the founder of this center, the visionary and former Vice Chancellor, you have the virtual space, sir.
Thank you very much. Mine is very brief. I would have loved for this UNESCO-sponsored activity to also look at what I call inward migration, because all the time we're talking about inward migration. Inward migration. Because most of the data and discussions and debate and narratives keep talking about outward migration. But yet, there are people who will look at Nigeria as a model of development. I know for a fact. Right now, my two young guest men in Kano here in my house are from Niger Republic. And they are eager. There are many people from Damagaram, from Marathi, from Dogonduse in Niger Republic who see Nigeria as a gold pot, and therefore they migrate inward. So the UNESCO data should expand its scope to look at inward migration in order to prove to the government and people that Nigeria is not all that bad. And that there is, despite the banditry and all that, yet there are people who are eager to come into Nigeria. That may be a sociological paradox, but I think it's something that we need to look at one state or the other. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I think I want to support that idea of tolerating one another. Nigeria has been a very, very tolerating nation. And then looking at that paradigm could also, in the words of Professor Bogoro, lead to a paradigm shift. Again, I thank each and every one of you. I've asked all of you to unmute, and the usual thank you, bye-bye. Stop. Thank you very much.
Okay.